The woman who kept folding paper birds for her daughter finally gave her the first one. On the morning of her 32nd birthday, Clara Venn found a paper bird under her teacup and a brass key beside it. The bird was the color of a stormy lake, blue-gray, almost silver where the paper had been creased too often. Its wings were folded with the old precision Clara knew better than most faces. One wing lay flat, the other was lifted, ready to fly. The key was warm from her mother's hand. "You must not use it," Miriam Venn said. For a moment, Clara thought she had misheard. Rain tapped against the front parlor windows of the Venn house, and below them a streetcar groaned along Olive Street, its bell clanging through the wet April air. In the dining room, the three boarders were waiting for breakfast with the practiced patience of people who paid weekly and believed a landlady's family troubles ought to remain invisible. Clara looked down at the key. A narrow strip of black velvet was tied through its bow. "Then why give it to me?" she asked. Miriam stood at the sideboard in her plain dark dress, cutting oranges into thin wheels. Her hair, once the color of tea, had gone white at the temples in the 5 years since Clara last lived in the house. She did not look up. "Because I am tired of keeping it." "What does it open?" Miriam pressed the knife into the cutting board and held it there. "A room in the old Marlowe Theater." Clara's hand closed around the key so quickly that its teeth marked her palm. The Marlowe had been shut for nearly 20 years. Everyone in St. Louis knew that. It had once stood behind the Venn house, across a crooked alley where rainwater gathered in brown pools. In Clara's childhood, it was a brick giant with blind windows and a gold-lettered sign that had peeled down to 3 letters, R-L-O. Boys threw stones through the upper panes. Pigeons lived beneath the roof. Mothers warned their children not to go near it because the stage floor had burned once and might fall through again. Miriam had given no warning. She had simply said every time Clara asked, "That place has taken enough from people." And Clara, who had been taught from the age of 9 that some questions made a room colder, had learned not to ask. Now, after all these years, the key lay on the table between the birthday cups. "You have a key to the Marlowe?" Clara said. "I had one." "Since when?" "Eat something. You have a train at 11. It was like her mother to answer a question with an instruction. Clara felt the old, familiar anger rise in her before she could stop it. It had been waiting somewhere beneath the years, beneath her work in Chicago and the apartment she shared with no one, beneath the sensible dresses she bought with money she earned herself. A woman could leave home, change cities, sign her own leases, and still become 12 years old again when her mother chose that tone. "I can miss the train." "No, you cannot." "Why not?" "Because you have pupils this afternoon. They can survive one afternoon without scales." Miriam finally lifted her eyes. They were pale blue and direct, the eyes Clara had spent half her life trying to read. "You built a life in Chicago because you wanted one. Do not make it smaller merely because I have handed you an old key." The words were reasonable. That was what hurt. Miriam could make any wall sound like good advice. Clara pushed back her chair. "You know what? I will open it." Her mother did not flinch. "Not today." "You do not get to decide that." "No," Miriam said quietly. "I do not. I am asking you." The boarders had fallen silent. Mr. Bell, who sold typewriter ribbons downtown, stared into his coffee. Mrs. Pietra, a widow from Naples with a son in the shoe trade, made the sign of the cross so discreetly that Clara might have imagined it. Clara took the paper bird, put it in her handbag, and walked out before she said something she could not take back. She did not go to the station. She went to the alley behind the house. The rain had softened to a mist. Across the narrow lane, the Marlowe Theater rose above the rooflines, blackened brick against a white sky. A new notice had been nailed to its side door. Clayton and Ryder Development Company. Demolition to commence May 1st. Clara had passed that theater as a child 1,000 times. Yet standing there now, she could not remember the color of its doors, or the shape of the brass handles, or why her mother had always hurried her along whenever the wind carried the smell of dust and wet plaster from inside. She remembered other things instead. She remembered birthdays. On every birthday from the year she turned 9, Miriam had folded her a paper bird. No dolls, no lace collars, no expensive presents that might have embarrassed a household always one rent payment behind. A bird. Sometimes red, sometimes gold, once made from the blue sheet music wrapper that had protected a set of hymns. Miriam would put it beneath Clara's breakfast cup before dawn, and Clara would pretend not to have seen it until her mother entered the room. "A bird for your next year," Miriam would say. "What does it do?" Clara had asked the first time. "It reminds you that a window is not a wall." At 9, Clara had thought this was nonsense. At 14, she thought it was a sermon. At 19, when she boarded the train for Chicago with one trunk and a recommendation from the Ladies' Music Academy, she had carried the latest paper bird in the pocket of her coat. Then, ashamed of needing anything from home, she had left it on the train. Miriam never mentioned the loss. The next year, a bird arrived in an envelope, crushed by the post, but carefully repaired with a line of white thread along one wing. The one in Clara's handbag was different. It was older, faded, and so soft at the creases that it seemed less folded than remembered. At the far end of the alley, a man stepped from beneath the theater's loading awning. He wore a surveyor's coat and carried a roll of plans beneath his arm. Clara recognized him at once, though she had not seen him since her father's funeral. Thomas Hale had been the Marlowe's caretaker in its last years. He was bent now, but his narrow face was unchanged. When Clara was little, he had given her peppermints wrapped in wax paper and told her that theaters had more ghosts in their walls than churches did. "Miss Venn," he called. "You are home." "Only for the day?" He nodded toward the Venn house. "Your mother knows you're out here?" "Does it matter?" The old man gave a dry cough that might have been a laugh. "It always mattered to your mother." Clara came closer. "Mr. Hale, what was in room 7? His face changed, not dramatically, that would have been easier. His fingers merely tightened around the plans. "Who gave you that number?" "My mother gave me a key." For a while he listened to the rain ticking on the metal awning. "I wondered how long she could keep it from you." "Keep what from me?" "That depends on what she has told you." "Nothing. She has told me nothing for 32 years. Thomas looked at her with a kind of pity that Clara could not bear. "That is not true, child. She told you what she knew how to tell you." "Then tell me plainly." He glanced toward the theater. Room 7 was not a room when I first saw it. It was a dressing space behind the eastern fly tower. Small, hot in summer, cold in winter. The company ladies used it when the better rooms were taken. "What company?" "The Larkspur Players." The name meant nothing to Clara, but when Thomas said it, something in her body remembered before her mind did. A corridor smelling of face powder, a woman's laughter behind a closed door, a bright note held too long on a piano. She had no right to remember any of that. Her earliest clear memory was of the Venn house kitchen, Miriam lifting her onto a stool so she could dry spoons. Her father Edwin had been alive then, broad-shouldered and quiet, with paint beneath his nails from the sign shop where he worked. They had told Clara that she came to them after a fever took her parents in a town south of Springfield. She had been too young to ask why there was no grave to visit. At 12, she had asked Miriam whether her mother had sung, Miriam had dropped a porcelain cup. It shattered against the floor, and for the rest of the day she moved through the house as though she had been struck. "Why would you ask such a thing?" she had said at last. "I don't know." "Then do not ask things you do not know." Clara had never asked again. Thomas Hale unrolled one edge of his plans. The theater was all lines and measurements, stripped of velvet and dust and silence. He pointed to a narrow rectangle near the rear wall. "Room 7 is here, or what is left of it." "Can I go in?" "The building is condemned." "Can I go in?" He studied her, then shook his head. "Not alone." "Then come with me." "Not today." The refusal landed harder than it should have. Clara was already tired of doors, of cautious people, of a secret that seemed to belong to everyone except her. "Is it because you promised my mother?" "Yes." "And she promised me nothing." Thomas lowered the plans. "That is where you are wrong." Before Clara could demand an answer, the back door of the Venn house opened. Miriam stood on the step without a coat, one hand gripping the doorframe. She looked smaller than she had at breakfast. Not older, exactly. Smaller, as if the rain had washed some necessary outline from her. "Clara?" she called. There was no command in her voice this time, only fear. Clara walked back across the alley, the brass key in her fist. When she reached her mother, Miriam saw it and closed her eyes. "I was going to tell you," she said. "When?" "After your train left." Clara stared at her. "That does not make sense." "No." Miriam's mouth trembled once, then steadied. "It does not." From inside the house came the clink of breakfast dishes and Mrs. Pietra's soft, worried voice. The ordinary sounds made the alley feel stranger, as though one world had continued while another had opened its door. Miriam reached for Clara's sleeve but did not touch it. "The bird you found," she said, "was the first one I ever made for you. I know it is old. You were 4 years old. You could not keep it. You cried because its wing tore." Clara looked down at the blue-gray paper. Along the lifted wing ran a thin white thread, stitched by hand. "Why would I remember that?" Miriam looked toward the Marlowe Theater. "Because you were there." The streetcar bell sounded again beyond the rain. Clara did not move. For the first time in her life, she understood that the stories Miriam had not told were not empty spaces. They were rooms. Someone had locked them, turned the key, and lived beside them for years. And now the key was in Clara's hand. Clara did not remember going back into the house. One moment the rain was cold against her cheeks, and the next she was standing in the narrow hall beside the umbrella stand, with Miriam shutting the door behind them. The boarders had vanished from the dining room. Their plates had been cleared. The smell of coffee remained, but the house had been restored to its usual order so quickly that Clara could almost believe she had imagined Thomas Hale, the plans, the locked room, the blue bird stitched with white thread. "Come upstairs," Miriam said. Clara did not move. "No more half answers." "There will not be any. You said that when I was 15. Miriam looked down. "I know." The admission disarmed Clara more than an argument would have. Her mother had never been a woman who apologized by speaking softly. If she was sorry, she scrubbed a floor that did not need scrubbing, mended a sleeve that was not torn, made a room ready for someone who had not said she was coming. Words had always seemed to her the least dependable kind of work. Still, Clara followed her up the stairs. The attic had been converted into a spare room after Clara left for Chicago. A narrow bed stood beneath the eaves, covered by a faded quilt. A washstand held a blue basin with a crack running through its glaze. On the far wall, between the sloping roof and the chimney breast, was a small door Clara had never seen open. Miriam took a key ring from her apron pocket. It held 3 keys, the pantry, the front desk drawer, and a tiny iron one, black with age. "When did you put that door there?" Clara asked. "It was always there."
"You told me it was only a cupboard." "It is a cupboard. And that makes it better." Miriam did not answer. The lock complained when she turned the key. Behind the door was no secret chamber, only a shallow space between beams. There were blankets, a box of Christmas ornaments, a broken parasol, and at the very back, a small leather case with a strap gone brittle. Miriam brought it to the bed and sat it down. "This was in room 7, she said. Clara stared at it. "All these years?" "Not all. Thomas brought it to me after the theatre shut. I could not make myself throw it away." "But you could make yourself lie to me." Miriam's hand remained on the case. "Yes." The word was so bare that Clara felt it in her throat. Inside lay a child's shoe, brown leather, its toe scuffed white, a small wool glove with a missing thumb, and a strip of blue-grey paper, carefully flattened beneath a square of glass. The paper had once been part of a handbill. Clara could see, upside down and broken by folds, the words, "One night only," and a flourish of red ink. It had been folded into a bird. "That was mine?" she asked. "Yours." "You made it?" "No." Miriam's face had gone still. Clara had seen that stillness only twice before, when Edwin Venn died at the hospital and when a small boy from the second floor had been carried out with scarlet fever. It was not the stillness of calm. It was the stillness of a person holding shut a door against weather. "Your mother made it," she said. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed because her knees had ceased to be reliable. "My mother. Her name was Helena March." The name did not strike Clara as familiar. It was worse than familiar. It was empty. For 32 years there had been a blank place in her life, and now someone had put 2 ordinary words inside it. Helena March. "Was she with the Larkspur Players?" Miriam nodded. "Was she an actress?" "She sang. Sometimes she acted. Mostly she sang. And she was my mother." "Yes." Clara pressed the heel of her hand against the brass key in her pocket. "You told me she died in a fever." "I told you both your parents died." "Did my father die?" For the first time since they had entered the attic, Miriam looked directly at her. "I never knew who he was." The roof ticked as rain gathered and slid over the shingles. Clara could hear the whole house breathing beneath them. A boarder walking across a room, pipes knocking in the wall, a carriage passing in the street. "Start at the beginning," she said. Miriam sat in the rocking chair by the window. It had been Clara's chair once, although she had long outgrown the thought of it. She folded her hands together, then unfolded them. "I was 21 when I went to work at the Marlowe," she began. "I did not want to mend bodices all my life, but that was the work I could find. I could sew quickly, and I knew how to keep my mouth closed. In a theater, those were considered useful gifts." Clara had never heard her mother speak about wanting anything. The word sounded awkward in Miriam's voice, almost foreign. "Edwin painted scenery. He had beautiful hands and terrible judgment about money. We were not married yet. We thought we would wait until he had a better position, and then we kept waiting until it seemed foolish to talk about it." Despite herself, Clara saw her father as he had been, laughing at a joke no one else understood, bringing home a painted wooden swan from the sign shop, using the back of an old envelope to sketch the face of every customer who annoyed him. It was strange to imagine him young enough to wait for a future. "Helena came with the Larkspur Company in the autumn of 1881, Miriam continued. She was 26, perhaps 27. She could fill a hall with her voice,
and then sit alone in the dressing room as if she had disappointed someone. The men admired her. The women did not trust her. I think both groups were wrong about her.
Did you know her well? Not at first. Then, one night, she brought you to room 7. Clara's fingers tightened around the old shoe. You were 4 years old. You had a blue wool coat and a cough that made you angry because it interrupted you when you wanted to talk. Helena was meant to go on in the second act. She said the woman who watched you had been taken ill, and she had no one else.
So she left me with you.
For an hour.
And then?
Then the second act ended. The rain began. The audience went home. You fell asleep against my shoulder. Helena did not come back. Clara waited. At midnight, I found a man from the company loading trunks at the stage door. He said they were leaving for Indianapolis before dawn. He said Helena had taken a place in another troupe. I thought he was lying. I carried you through every corridor in that theater, calling her name. She was gone. The attic seemed to tilt gently beneath Clara. She imagined the theater not as the black ruin behind the alley, but as a living place. Lamps burning behind painted flats, women lifting their skirts over puddles, men shouting for trunks, a child asleep while a door closed somewhere below. She left me. Miriam closed her eyes. Yes, just like that. Nothing is ever just like that, Clara. The answer came too quickly. Clara rose from the bed. Do not begin protecting her now. I am not protecting her. You have protected everyone except me. Miriam's face moved as if the words had struck a place already bruised. I protected a 4-year-old child from a truth she could not carry. And when I was 14? You were 14. When I was 20? You had just left home and would not open half my letters. When I was 30? Miriam stood. When you were 30, I was a coward. The room fell silent. Clara had wanted anger. Anger was clean. It had edges. This was something else. Her mother standing before her with no defense left, and still not giving her the one thing she needed most, an explanation that could make the years arrange themselves into sense. Did you take me to the orphanage? Clara asked. No. Edwin and I kept you for 6 weeks while we looked for her. We went to the police, to the company's agent, to the boarding houses where performers stayed. We found nothing. Then the company manager wrote that Helena had sailed from New York with a new engagement. She wrote? Miriam shook her head. Not to us. So you adopted me. We petitioned for guardianship. The court called you a dependent child. Edwin signed the papers, I signed them. We brought you here. You cried for your mother for months. The words made Clara's body remember a grief her mind could not reach. She saw, without seeing, a small hand striking against a closed door. She heard a voice she did not recognize calling a name that was not Miriam. Why did you change my name? Because the court suggested it would make matters easier. Easier for whom? Miriam did not reply. Clara walked to the window. The theater roof was visible between 2 chimneys, a dark wedge through the rain. Somewhere beyond it lay the station and the train she was supposed to have taken to Chicago. Her pupils would be waiting in the parlor of Mrs. Harrow's academy, tapping impatient fingers against closed piano lids. The thought gave her a small, sharp pleasure. Let them wait. Behind her, Miriam spoke again. Helena came back. Clara turned. Miriam was holding the blue bird beneath the glass, but she was no longer looking at it. When? The following summer? She came back for me? She came to the Venn house. And you did not tell me. You were 5. Did she see me? Miriam swallowed. No.
The next question did not want to leave Clara's mouth. It scraped at her as it came. "Because you would not let her?" Miriam's lips parted. No sound came out at first. Then she said, "Yes." Clara could not feel her hands. "She had left me in a dressing room," Miriam said. "She had disappeared without a word. She arrived in a hired carriage wearing a new hat and told me she was ready to take you back." Ready, as if you were a trunk she had stored with someone for the season. "And you decided she could not see me." "I decided she would not break you twice." "You decided?" "Yes." There it was. Not a misunderstanding, not a missing record, not an accident, not a cruel bureaucracy. A decision. Miriam's decision, made in the hot summer of 1882, and then carried through every birthday, every paper bird, every question Clara had learned not to ask. Clara looked at the woman who had sat beside her through childhood fevers, who had hemmed every dress she owned until she was 20, who had sent money to Chicago inside the lining of a glove when Clara would not accept it any other way. She loved her. The fact did not soften anything.
"What did Helena say?" Clara asked.
Miriam's shoulders gave one small, exhausted drop. "She said she had made a mistake." "And what did you say?" "I said, so had I." Clara stared at her. "I had no right to say it," Miriam whispered. "But I said it." Outside, a gust of wind slapped rain against the window. The brass key seemed to burn through Clara's skirt pocket. At last, she picked up her handbag. "Where are you going?" Miriam asked. "To the station." Miriam nodded as if she had expected it, but Clara stopped at the door. "No," she said, "not the station. I am going to find Mr. Hale." Her mother went white. "Clara, please. You gave me the key. I gave it to you because I thought truth might be less cruel in your hands than in mine. Then do not ask me to put it down." She left the attic with the old paper bird in her handbag and the first bird ever made for her tucked carefully inside her glove. At the end of the hall, beside the banister, stood the telephone box. Clara lifted the receiver and asked the operator for Chicago. While the line clicked and hissed, she looked through the front window toward the alley. The rain had stopped. Across the roofs, the broken sign of the Marlowe Theater caught a pale strip of afternoon light. For the first time, Clara did not see a ruin. She saw a place that had been waiting for her to enter. Clara did not sleep in the room beneath the eaves that night. She lay on top of the quilt and watched the ceiling change color as dawn came through the rain clouds. Once, near 3 o'clock, she heard Miriam moving downstairs. A cupboard opened. Water ran briefly through the pipes, then the house settled again. There were 100 questions Clara could have asked through the floorboards. Why had Helena left without a word? Why had Miriam taken her in? Why did people who loved a child decide that love gave them the right to arrange the child's past? But every question seemed to lead back to the same unbearable fact. Before Miriam had become her mother, she had been a stranger in a theater room with a crying little girl in her arms. At 7, Clara, dressed in yesterday's skirt, pinned up her hair and went downstairs. Miriam was sitting at the kitchen table in a wrapper, both hands around a cup of coffee gone cold. She had not lit the stove. The morning paper lay unopened beside her, though she was a woman who read every line of news before the first boarder came down. "Mr. Hale said 8, Clara told her. Miriam nodded. "I telephoned Chicago. Mrs. Harrow will cover my pupils until Monday." Another nod. Clara waited for an argument. Miriam had strong opinions about missed trains, wasted money, and women who allowed men in offices to think they could be treated carelessly. But she said nothing. "Are you going to tell me not to go?" Clara asked. "No." "You could." "I could. But you will not." Miriam looked at her then. The skin beneath her eyes was gray with exhaustion. "I have told you not to go near that building for 20 years. I do not suppose one more warning would suddenly become wisdom." It was almost a joke. Clara could not laugh. She took her gloves from the peg. At the door, Miriam said, "Wear the brown shoes. The floor is full of nails." Clara looked down at the black boots she had put on. "I do not own brown shoes anymore." Miriam's face changed. A small, helpless expression crossed it and disappeared. "Of course you do not," she said. The Marlowe was colder inside than the street. Thomas Hale had opened the loading door and wedged it with a brick. He carried a lantern despite the daylight. Its yellow flame wobbled beneath the glass as he led Clara through a passage clogged with splintered scenery flats and coils of old rope. "Stay on the boards where I step," he said. "The plaster comes down without warning." The theater had always been large in Clara's imagination. As a ruin, it was larger still. The lobby ceiling had fallen in, leaving a wedge of pale sky above the broken ticket window. Dust covered the red carpet in a grey skin. A gilt cherub, half torn from the wall, lay on its side near the staircase, as if it had been struck from heaven and forgotten. They crossed beneath the balcony and entered the auditorium. For a moment, Clara stopped breathing. Rows of seats rose from the darkness, most of them stripped of velvet. The stage curtain had rotted away years ago, but a fragment remained, caught high above the proscenium, a deep green fold with a spray of painted white lilies. On the stage itself stood a single chair facing the empty house. "Why is that there?" Clara asked. Thomas raised the lantern. "Someone from the demolition crew put it there last week. They said it was funny." It did not look funny. It looked like waiting. Behind the stage, the corridors narrowed. Dressing rooms opened on either side, their doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. Some held cracked mirrors. Some had nothing but peeling paint and a sour smell of damp wood. Thomas stopped before a door at the end of a passage. The number 7 was still there, faintly stenciled in black. Clara took the brass key from her pocket. "It may not turn," he said. "It turned yesterday." "Not in this lock. Your mother had another key made after the fire inspector sealed the building. She kept the old one because she could not bear to throw it out." Clara looked at the key. "So it opens nothing." Thomas's mouth tightened. "That depends on the day." The door yielded when he leaned his shoulder against it. Room 7 was smaller than Clara had expected. There was a cracked washstand, an iron stove with one leg missing, and a strip of mirror nailed to the wall above a dressing shelf. The wallpaper had once shown blue swallows in flight. Most had peeled away, but one bird remained near the ceiling, its wings spread over a brown stain left by rainwater. Clara stood in the doorway and tried to force memory to arrive. Nothing came. Then Thomas set the lantern on the shelf, and its light moved across the floorboards. In the corner beside the stove, a child's handprint appeared in the dust. Not recent, not real. Only darker wood where a small palm had once been pressed into varnish and the rest had worn away. Clara crouched before it. "That was you," Thomas said. She did not look up. "How do you know?" "Because I watched you make it." His voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of an old caretaker speaking about a building. It was the voice of someone who had kept a memory long past the time it was useful. "You had paint on your hands. Edwin was touching up a sky flat and you wanted to help. Helena scolded him for letting you near the paint. You laughed at her. You had a laugh that made people turn around." Clara placed her own hand over the dark mark. It was smaller, of course. So much smaller. "Did she love me?" she asked. Thomas did not answer at once. That was answer enough to make her stand. "Do not be careful with me, Mr. Hale." "I am trying not to be cruel." "Those are not the same thing." He looked toward the cracked mirror. "She loved you. I believe that. But she loved the stage, too. and she was afraid of the man who owned it. And she had made such a poor life that loving you did not make her brave every day. Clara said nothing. Thomas pulled a short pry bar from his coat. He went to the wall beneath the mirror and lifted one loose board. Behind it was a narrow cavity, black with dust. "I found this after the theater closed," he said. "I never gave it to Miriam. She had enough ghosts in her house." He reached inside and brought out a tin candy box. Its painted lid showed a white dog beside a basket of violets. The hinges had turned orange with rust, but the box was still shut.
"What is it? I do not know." Clara's first instinct was to refuse it. She was tired of objects that had waited years for her. But the tin lay in Thomas's outstretched hand, not accusing her, only heavy with whatever time had put inside. She opened it. There were no letters, no confession written in a hand she could compare, no neat account of what had been done to her. There were 3 things: a small silver button shaped like a moon, a piece of yellow chalk, and 6 paper birds folded from different scraps of theater bills. The birds were not beautiful. Their creases were uneven, some wings torn. One had been mended with a strip of red thread. On another, a child had drawn 2 dots and a crooked smile before the paper was folded. Clara touched none of them. "They were yours?" Thomas asked. "I do not know. The first time I saw Helena fold one, she was trying to keep you quiet during a rehearsal. She said birds could go through walls if a child believed hard enough." The phrase came back to Clara with the force of a hand against her chest. A window is not a wall. She had thought Miriam invented it. The blue bird in her glove seemed suddenly unbearable. All those birthdays, all those careful wings beneath her teacup. Miriam had not merely kept a ritual. She had taken a sentence that belonged to another woman and made it the language of Clara's life. "Did Miriam know about this box?" "No." "Why did you keep it?" Thomas's eyes moved around the room. "Because I had watched too many people remove pieces of themselves before the wrecking men came. A theater is full of things that do not look important until they are the last proof a person was ever there." Clara closed the tin. From the corridor came the scrape of boots. A broad man in a bowler hat appeared in the doorway. He wore a new coat, a heavy watch chain, and the impatient face of someone accustomed to entering rooms already belonging to him. "Hail," he said. "I gave you 20 minutes. "Mr. Carver," Thomas replied. The man looked at Clara. "You ought not be in here, miss. The east wall is unsafe." "I am leaving," she said. "Good." He glanced at the tin box. "Nothing is to be removed until the inventory is done." "This belonged to my family." "Then it can be noted. Everything comes through my office." Clara had met men like him in Chicago, men who spoke in the smooth voice of procedure while deciding what could be broken, sold, or buried. She felt her anger return, grateful for its clarity. "This is a child's box," she said. "It is property found in a building my company purchased." "It is a tin box full of paper." "Then you may have no difficulty proving it has no value." Thomas shifted forward, but Clara caught his sleeve. "Write it down," she said to Carver. "Room 7, tin box, 6 paper birds, a silver button, yellow chalk. And write down that I will be at your office this afternoon." Carver gave her a long look. "Your name?" "Clara Venn." At the sound of it, Thomas looked away. Carver wrote without comment. When he had gone, Clara remained still for a moment, holding the box against her coat. "You did not need to do that," Thomas said. "I know." "The man will make trouble." "Then let him." They left the theater by the loading door. The day had cleared. Sunlight lay on the wet cobbles of the alley, too bright after the dark rooms behind them. Miriam was waiting beside the Venn house gate. She had put on her hat and gloves. In her hands she held a parcel wrapped in brown cloth.
For a second, Clara thought it was food, some habitual offering meant to turn sorrow into something manageable. But the parcel was too flat. "Mr. Carver saw you," Miriam said. "He did. He has no kindness in him. Neither did Helena, apparently." Miriam's hands tightened around the parcel. "No, not enough." Clara waited for her mother to defend the woman who had left. Miriam did not. Instead, she held out the parcel. "This was in Edwin's things," she said. "I should have shown it to you years ago." Clara did not take it. "What is it?" "A photograph. Not of Helena. Of you." "At the theater?" "Yes." The word struck harder than it should have. Clara thought of the erased years before the Venn House kitchen, the false fever, the invented town south of Springfield. "Was my name Clara March?" "It was Clara March. And you made me Clara Venn." Miriam did not lower her eyes. "We did." Clara took the parcel at last. It was light as a handkerchief. "I will look at it later," she said. Miriam nodded. "There is someone else you should speak to before you decide what kind of woman Helena was." Clara laughed once without humor. "Has the whole city been waiting to tell me my own life?" "No, only one person." "Who?" "Ada Rusk. She was the pianist for the Larkspur Company. She lives on Cass Avenue now, above a milliner's shop." "Why have you never told me?" "Because I was afraid of what she would say."
Clara looked at the theater, then at the woman who had raised her. The truth was beginning to show its shape, and it was not the clean blade she had expected. It was a room full of objects, each one carrying a different weight. "Good," Clara said. "So am I." Ada Rusk lived above a milliner's shop on Cass Avenue, in 2 rooms that smelled of dust, rose water, and the oil she used to loosen stiff piano keys. The stairs were steep and uneven. Clara climbed them slowly, one hand on the rail, thinking how absurd it was that she needed courage to knock on a stranger's door when she had spent the last day walking through the wreckage of her own childhood. Before she could knock, a woman's voice called, "If you are selling encyclopedias, I have already died twice this week and cannot afford a 3rd volume." Clara opened the door. Ada Rusk was sitting at a square piano with its front panel removed. She was nearly 70, small and narrow as a clothes peg, with white hair pinned in a careless coil. A jeweler's lens hung from a cord around her neck. At her feet lay a scatter of felt hammers, screws, and an orange cat asleep on a stack of music. "Mrs. Rusk?" "That is what the grocer calls me when he wants payment." Ada looked up. "You must be Clara." It was the second time in 2 days that someone had recognized her from a life she did not remember. The feeling did not become easier. "Miriam told you I might come?" "No. Miriam never tells anyone anything if she can possibly carry it alone. Thomas Hale came by this morning." Clara almost smiled. "Does everyone in St. Louis report to Thomas Hale?" "Only people who still owe him an apology." Ada pointed to a chair beside the window. "Sit. You have your mother's tired face." "Which mother?" Ada's hands paused over the open piano. "Ah," she said. "Then we had better begin carefully." "No," Clara replied. "You had better begin honestly." For a while, Ada did not speak. She replaced one of the felt hammers, tested a note, and listened to its thin, imperfect sound. "Helena March was the finest singer I ever accompanied," she said at last. "Not the finest actress. She forgot her lines when she was worried, and she was worried most of the time. But when she sang, a room became willing to forgive her everything. My mother left me in a dressing room." "Yes." "Did she tell you why?" "She told me many reasons. I doubt any of them made the thing less terrible." Clara held herself very still. "Theatre people say a great deal in corridors.
Ada went on. Mostly they say it because there is nowhere else to put their fear. Helena told me she would be gone 2 weeks. She'd been offered a part with a company going east. She believed that if she got the part, she could rent rooms in Boston and take you there before winter. And she left me with Miriam while she tried. She meant to leave you with Miriam for an evening.
Then the company manager told her the train left before dawn. It was take the train or lose the place. So she took it. Ada nodded. She took it. The simple answer made Clara's skin feel cold. She had expected a dreadful complication, a villain, a locked door, some fact grand enough to balance the ache of being left. Instead, there was a train schedule and a woman making a choice at dawn. Was she a bad woman? Clara asked. Ada's face folded into something that was not quite sorrow. She was a woman who had been frightened too long. That can make people bad at the exact moment they most wish to be good. That is not an answer. No, it is the only one I have. The cat opened one eye, judged the room uninteresting, and went back to sleep. Ada rose and crossed to a bureau. From its top drawer, she took a narrow picture frame wrapped in a hand towel. The photograph inside was small and sepia-toned, taken in a cheap studio with a painted garden behind the subjects. Clara knew herself before she knew anyone else. She was 4 years old, perhaps, with a round face and dark hair cut unevenly above her eyebrows. She was seated on a stool, holding a paper bird with both hands. On one side stood Helena March, beautiful in a way that seemed almost rude. Her mouth was serious, but her eyes were turned toward the child. On the other stood Miriam, younger than Clara had ever imagined her, in a plain dress with her hair braided tightly at the back of her neck. Miriam was not looking at the camera. She was looking at Clara. This was taken a week before Helena left, Ada said. She asked for 3 prints. I kept one because she thought you looked cross and said it was spoiled. Clara could not take her eyes from the photograph. Miriam already loved me, she said. Ada did not answer. She had known me a week and she already loved me. Some people are built that way, Ada said softly. It is not always a blessing. Clara put the frame down before she dropped it. Tell me about the day Helena came back. Ada's fingers closed around the towel. Miriam told you? She told me she refused to let Helena see me. Then she has made a start. A start? Ada looked toward the window. Below them, a delivery boy guided a horse cart around a puddle. The ordinary care of his movements seemed unbearable. Helena came back with money, Ada said. Not a fortune. Enough for 2 small rooms and a woman to watch you while she worked. She had a new contract at a music hall in Chicago. She said the traveling company had treated her badly, that the manager had made promises he did not keep. She said she had searched for you everywhere. And had she? I do not know. She had been in Boston, Philadelphia, New York. She had sung wherever someone would pay. She looked thinner, older. She held herself like a person who had not slept properly for a year. That does not mean she searched. No. What did Miriam say? Ada's mouth tightened. She said no. Nothing else? She said the child had a home now. She said you did not remember Helena. She said that a woman who could leave a child in a dressing room did not get to return when applause had failed her elsewhere. Clara's chest hurt. Was I inside? You were playing in the backyard with a hoop. Miriam would not let Helena come through the gate. Did Helena ask again? She stood outside the house for a long time. The room was too small. Clara rose and walked to the window, but the street below offered no relief. And you were there, she said. I was there. Why did you not stop her? Ada's eyes filled, though no tears fell. Because I had seen you wake from nightmares calling for a woman who had gone.
Because I watched Miriam sit beside your bed every night for months. Because I was angry with Helena too. And because being angry alongside someone can feel so much like loyalty that you do not notice when it becomes cowardice. Clara turned back. How many people knew? Not many. Thomas, Edwin, me. And all of you agreed to let me grow up in a story that was not mine. We agreed to let you grow up, loved. Those are not opposites. Ada looked down at the exposed piano strings. No, she said. They should not have been. When Clara returned to the Venn house, the front parlor was full of hats. 3 women from the neighborhood sat with Miriam near the cold fireplace, their skirts arranged carefully around their knees. Clara recognized Mrs. Weller from the flower shop, Mrs. Dunn from church, and a pale woman named Fisk, who had once told Clara at 16 that girls who practiced too much music grew selfish. They fell quiet when she entered. Miriam stood. Clara, I need to speak with you. Mrs. Weller collected her gloves with exaggerated speed. We were just leaving. Mrs. Fisk was less graceful. The whole neighborhood is talking about the theater, you know. Mr. Carver has put notices in the paper.
He is selling the old furnishings on Saturday. Such a dreadful place. I always said it ought to have been torn down after that business with the company. Miriam's face went rigid. Clara looked at the woman. What business? Mrs. Dunn touched Mrs. Fisk's sleeve, but too late. Oh, I only mean the singer, Mrs. Fisk said. The woman who ran off. People said she had a little girl hidden about the place. I cannot remember the name. Helena March, Clara said. The women stared at her. Miriam came to Clara's side, not close enough to touch. Mrs. Fisk colored. I did not know, no, Clara said. You did not. She went upstairs before the woman could find a kinder lie. In the attic room, Clara set the photograph beside the tin box. The 2 women stood on either side of a child, holding a paper bird. Neither appeared to be smiling. Yet there was no mistaking the way both of them watched her. After several minutes, Miriam entered without knocking. Ada told you, she said. Ada told me what you did. Yes. She said Helena had money, a room, work. She said Helena had come back. Yes. You could have let her see me. Miriam sat in the rocking chair. I could have. You could have let me decide later. I could have. The repetition was unbearable. Clara wanted a defense to push against. She wanted Miriam to say Helena had been drunk, violent, cruel, incapable. She wanted something that would turn the old woman's closed gate into a clear act of mercy. Instead, Miriam said, I saw her standing on the pavement. I saw her hands shaking, and I thought, if I let that woman through the gate, Clara will love her because children love the people they have been waiting for. Then she will leave again, and I will have helped her do it. You do not know she would have left. No. You wanted me for yourself. Miriam's gaze did not leave Clara's face. Yes. The words struck with more force than any denial could have. I was afraid of losing you, Miriam said. It was not noble. It was not even sensible. But it was true. Clara picked up the first blue-gray bird. Is this why you made these? Miriam looked at it for a long time. The first time I folded one was after Helena left. You would not sleep. I found the torn handbill in room 7 and thought perhaps if I made it into something small enough for your hands, you might stop crying. And you kept making them. At first because you asked. Later because I did not know how to say that I had taken something from you. The words hung between them. Downstairs, Mrs. Weller's voice floated toward the front door, offering a hurried goodbye. The house was full of people leaving carefully so as not to hear what should never have been said aloud. Clara looked again at the photograph.
On Saturday, she said. I am going to the sale. Miriam's hands tightened in her lap. Mr. Carver will have the things from room 7 there. I want what belongs to me. He will not make that easy. No. People will talk. Clara's laugh was quiet and bitter. They already have. Miriam stood. Then I will come with you. Clara met her eyes. I did not ask you to. I know. Do not come because you want to save me from the town. I do not, Miriam said. I will come because I am tired of standing behind doors while other people speak. For the first time since the key appeared beneath her teacup, Clara had no answer. She turned back to the photograph. The little girl in it held her paper bird as though it might fly away if she loosened her grip. On either side of her stood 2 women who had both failed her in different ways. And both, Clara understood now, had loved her enough to make the failure last. Saturday arrived bright and cold, with a hard blue sky above the roofs and wind enough to make the flags outside the department stores snap like rifle shots. By 10 o'clock, a crowd had gathered in front of the Marlowe Theater. Mr. Carver had placed a table in the broken lobby and arranged the salvage from the dressing rooms as though he were displaying wares in a respectable shop. There were brass wall sconces, chipped porcelain basins, 2 gilt frames without pictures, bundles of costume fabric, and a row of bentwood chairs. A clerk stood beside him with a clipboard. The ceiling above them was open to the morning light. Clara stopped at the curb. I thought he said there would be an inventory, she said. There was, Miriam replied. The inventory is the sale. Miriam had dressed carefully in her black wool coat and the hat with the small jet beads. It was the hat she wore to church when she expected to be seen by people whose opinions she did not value and could not entirely escape. She looked composed enough to be going to a funeral. Perhaps, Clara thought, that was exactly what this was. You do not have to stand beside me, she said. Miriam glanced at her. I know. It was becoming her mother's most honest answer. They crossed the street together. People made room for them, then filled the space behind them with whispers. Clara heard her name once, then again. She heard the word singer. She heard someone say, poor Edwin, as though the dead man had been cheated of something by a story he himself had helped create. Mr. Carver stood at the lobby table in his bowler hat, looking fresh and well-fed. He lifted 2 fingers to his clerk. Miss Venn. Mrs. Then. Clara March, Clara said. The correction came out before she had decided to make it. For 1 second, no one moved. Miriam's face did not change, but Clara saw her breath catch. Mr. Carver looked down at his paper. Very well. Miss March. It was a small thing, a name spoken in a ruined theater. Yet Clara felt as if she had stepped across a line she could not see. Carver tapped the clipboard. The tin box from room 7 is item 34. There is a filing fee and a release charge. I am told you believe it belonged to a relative. It belonged to me, Clara said. Can you establish that? She took the photograph from her handbag. The morning wind tugged at the edge of it as she held it out. Mr. Carver studied the picture, then studied Clara's face. That proves you were photographed in the theater, he said. It proves a child's things were kept in that room. It proves a child once stood in a studio. Miriam stepped forward. The child was Clara March. I was her legal guardian. The things in room 7 were kept for her. Her voice carried farther than Clara expected. Several people turned. Carver looked at Miriam. You are prepared to attest to that? Miriam's chin lifted. Yes. Then I will have the clerk make a note. Clara watched the pen move over the paper. She had spent years at pianos, teaching children how a note could enter a room and vanish before anyone understood it. But ink did not vanish. A line was made, and for some reason the line mattered. Carver named the release charge.
Miriam reached for her purse. Clara stopped her. "No," she said. "I will pay. Clara, I earned this money." Miriam withdrew her hand. The amount was not large. Clara paid it from the leather wallet she carried for railway tickets and pupils' fees. The coins made a neat final sound on the table. Mr. Carver handed the tin box to her. It weighed almost nothing. Then, from the rear of the lobby, a man spoke. "Miriam Venn?" She turned sharply. The speaker was tall and stooped, his coat too large at the shoulders. He held a cane in both hands. Clara recognized him only after a moment. Mr. Dorn, who had owned the tobacco shop near the old streetcar stop when she was a girl. He had been old then. Now he seemed made of paper and wire. "I thought that was you," he said. "And the child." Miriam's mouth went pale. "Mr. Dorn." "I was at the stage door the day Helena came back." The crowd did not grow quieter, it simply leaned in. Clara felt anger rise, not only for herself this time, but for the way a private wound became entertainment when enough strangers stood near it. "This is not your story to tell," she said. Mr. Dorn looked at her. "No, miss, it is yours. I am sorry it took so long for anyone to remember that." Miriam's hands were clenched at her sides. "What do you want?" she asked. The old man's face softened. "Nothing. I saw the notice in the paper. I thought perhaps the things would be sold and the whole matter would disappear again." Carver cleared his throat. "If you have business related to a claim, sir, speak to my clerk. Otherwise, I have no claim." Dorn did not look at him. "Only memory." Clara wanted to tell him to go. She wanted to drag Miriam away from the curious eyes, despite everything. But she remembered the woman in the attic saying she was tired of standing behind doors while other people spoke. "Say it," Clara told him. Mr. Dorn looked at Miriam first, asking without words. Miriam closed her eyes once, then opened them. "Say it," she echoed. "Helena came back 3 times, he said. The wind moved through the broken lobby. Somewhere higher in the theater, loose wood knocked against wood. Clara turned to Miriam. 3 times? Miriam did not deny it. "The first was in the summer," Dorn continued. "The next was 2 years later. She had a room at the Palmer House then. She asked me where the Venns lived. I told her. The last time was in 1886. She came to the stage door after a matinee. She had seen you in a carriage with Edwin. You were singing to yourself." Clara's throat tightened. "Did she speak to me?" "No." "Did you stop her?" Clara asked Miriam. Miriam's voice came low. "No. She did not come to the house that time. But you knew she was there. Mr. Dorn told me. And you did nothing. I did not know what to do." For the first time, the answer sounded less like confession than exhaustion. Clara hated herself for hearing the difference. Mr. Dorn rubbed one thumb along the head of his cane. "Helena asked me whether the child looked happy. I told her yes. She cried a little, then she went away." Mrs. Fisk, standing near the doorway in a plum-colored hat, made a soft sound in her throat. Clara looked at her so sharply that the woman lowered her eyes. "You should have told me," Clara said. Miriam looked at the floor. "Yes. Every time. Yes. How many other times did you decide what I could bear?" Miriam's face crumpled then, not loudly, not theatrically. It folded inward, as if age had found her all at once. "More than I can count," she said. Mr. Carver's clerk whispered something to him. He glanced at the sky visible through the broken ceiling. "This must continue," Carver said. "The next items are from the costume store." 2 workmen brought forward a cedar trunk with a cracked brass latch.
The clerk announced it as mixed theatrical effects, contents as found. Mr. Carver raised the lid.
Inside were lengths of faded silk, a tarnished tiara, paste brooches, a pair of satin slippers that had yellowed almost brown. Beneath them lay a folded blue shawl with silver fringe. Clara knew it before anyone said a word. The color was the same as the first paper bird. Ada Rusk stood at the rear of the lobby, wrapped in a brown coat, one gloved hand resting on her cane. Clara had not seen her arrive. "That was Helena's," Ada said. The crowd shifted again. Carver looked impatient. "Do you mean to claim it?" he asked. Ada shook her head. "No, I have no right." Clara stepped toward the trunk. The blue fabric lay folded with care, as if someone had hoped that care might preserve it. On one corner, almost hidden by dust, was a dark stain. "What happened to her?" Clara asked Ada. Ada did not answer immediately. "Helena went to Boston after the last time Mr. Dorn saw her," she said. "She taught singing to girls whose families wanted them to have accomplishments, but not careers." She sang sometimes in small halls. She had a room above a bakery. "Did she ever have another child?" "No." "Did she ever come for me again?" Ada's gaze moved to Miriam. "No," she said. "Not after 1886. The answer hurt in a new place. Clara had not known she was still hoping for a different one. "She died in 1904, Ada added. The lobby disappeared around Clara for a moment. There was only the word "died" moving slowly toward her. "How?" "Influenza. It came quickly. A woman who had studied with her sent word to me." "And did you tell Miriam?" "I did." Clara turned. Miriam's eyes closed. "You knew," Clara said. "Yes." "For 5 years." "Yes." "And you let me believe a woman I had never met was dead in a fever before I could remember her." Miriam did not answer. The blue shawl lay in the open trunk between them, shining faintly under a roof that no longer existed. Clara wanted to leave. She wanted to run down Olive Street until the city had swallowed this old neighborhood whole. But she saw the workmen waiting, the clerk watching, the women from church pretending not to listen. She had spent too much of her life being careful because someone else had decided that the truth would injure her. "I will take the shawl," she said. Carver named a price. This time Miriam began to protest. "Clara, you cannot buy every sorrow in that room." Clara looked at her. "No, but I can choose one thing myself." She paid the price. Mr. Carver wrapped the shawl in butcher paper. When he handed it over, his fingers brushed hers. "There are other pieces from room 7, he said. "A cracked mirror, some wall boards, nothing worth your money." "Keep them," Clara replied. She took the parcel and walked out of the theater. Miriam followed several steps behind, not near enough to touch. They went home by different sides of the street. That evening, Clara spread the blue shawl across the attic bed. It was finer than it had looked in the theater. Soft wool, silver fringe, a faint scent of cedar and old smoke. Near one end, where the cloth had been caught and repaired, a line of red thread held 2 torn edges together, the same red thread that mended one of the paper birds. Miriam stood in the doorway. "I did not know the shawl still existed," she said. "You knew Helena was dead?" "Yes." "Why did you not tell me?" Miriam came into the room but remained near the door. "Because I thought it would wake something in you that could not be answered." "It was already awake." "I know that now." "No, you knew it then. You simply did not want to see it." Miriam nodded once. Clara touched the blue fabric. "Did you ever hate her?" The question surprised them both. "Yes," Miriam said.
Then I missed her. Then I hated myself for missing her. She was not easy to love, Clara, but she was yours. She was mine. Yes. The word made no promise. It did not turn Helena into a good mother or Miriam into an innocent one. It only named a connection that had been cut out of Clara's life and hidden from her. Below them, the front door opened and closed. A boarder's voice called for hot water. The Venn house continued asking Miriam to be useful, as if usefulness could protect anyone from the past. Demolition begins Monday, Clara said. I know. Tomorrow I want to go back to room 7. Miriam looked toward the window where the roof of the Marlowe was barely visible against the dusk. All right, she said. Not with Thomas. With you. This time Miriam did not answer at once. Then she said, All right. Clara folded the shawl along its old creases and placed the first paper bird on top of it. The bird did not fly. It did not forgive. It simply rested there, with one mended wing lifted toward the dark. On Sunday morning, Clara and Miriam returned to the Marlowe before the bells of the nearby church had finished ringing. Thomas Hale was waiting at the loading door with his lantern and a thermos of coffee. He did not ask whether they had slept. The look on both their faces must have answered him. Carver's men begin stripping the roof tomorrow, he said. He gave me an hour, provided nobody touches the beams. Miriam looked past him into the dark corridor. I have not been inside since 1882, she said. Thomas did not reply. He only stepped aside. Clara led the way to room 7. In daylight, the room looked less mysterious than it had before. It was a square of bad plaster, warped floorboards, and old stains. The blue swallows and the wallpaper were scarcely visible. The iron stove had gone cold so long ago that it seemed part of the wall. Yet when Miriam crossed the threshold, she stopped as if she had reached the edge of a cliff. Clara had imagined this moment many times through the night. She had imagined anger making her strong, imagined standing back while the woman who had lied to her finally suffered in the place where the lie began. But Miriam's face held no drama. It held only a terrible recognition. You were asleep there, she said, pointing to the corner by the stove. Her voice was not aimed at Clara. It seemed to belong to the room itself. I had put my shawl under your head. The blue one was yours, but it was too thin for the cold. Helena's was over you. Clara looked at the bare floorboards. I woke you when I carried you out, Miriam said. You asked where Mama had gone. I told you she had gone to sing. You asked whether she would come back. I told you yes. The word came quietly. Yes. Clara turned away because she could not bear to see the woman's face. Why did you say it? She asked. Because I thought she would. And when she did not? Every day after that, I had to decide whether to say that I had been wrong. Clara faced her again. You should have. Yes. You should have told me when I was old enough to be hurt by the truth. Yes. You should have told me when Helena came to the gate. Miriam's eyes filled. Yes. The repeated answer did not ease Clara's anger. It made it impossible to use anger as a weapon. There was no defense to knock down. There was only a woman accepting every blow because she had carried the same blows in private for 28 years. Thomas walked to the corridor and left them alone. Then why? Clara said. Miriam pressed her hand to the cracked dressing shelf. The gesture was so careful that Clara understood her mother was touching the room exactly where she had touched it as a young woman. Because I wanted you, she said. Clara waited. Edwin and I had been married 4 years. We had lost 2 babies before they could be born. No one said the word loss then. The doctor told me to rest. My mother told me to be grateful for my husband.
The women at church told me God had other plans. I learned to smile when they spoke, because that was easier than making them uncomfortable. Miriam's hand remained against the shelf. Then you came into this room. You had a cough, a crooked fringe, and a fierce temper. You did not like anyone touching your hair. When I gave you a cup of water, you looked at me as if I had interrupted something important. I loved you before I had any right to love you. Clara felt tears rise, sudden and hot. She hated them. She hated that this story could still reach the part of her that wanted to be chosen. That does not give you the right, she said. No, Miriam replied. It was the beginning of the harm. The room went quiet again. Outside, a hammer rang somewhere in the theater. The sound traveled through the walls in dull, hollow beats. When Helena came to the gate, Miriam continued, I had spent a year watching you grow. I had learned every way you cried, every way you laughed. You called Edwin Papa by then. I had signed the guardianship papers. I was afraid that a judge would take you because the woman who bore you wanted you. I was afraid that you would go gladly. I was afraid that you would look back at me once, and I would understand that I had only been keeping you warm until someone else was ready. So you shut the gate? Yes. And later, when she came again? I told myself that if Helena truly loved you, she would keep coming. That was a cruel test. I made it because I wanted her to fail. Clara closed her eyes. There was no clean villain in the room. Helena had chosen a train. Miriam had chosen a gate. Each choice had been made by a frightened woman who loved Clara in a way that was incomplete, selfish, real. I loved you, Clara said, and the words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise Miriam. I loved you every day. That is what makes this worse. Miriam covered her mouth with one hand. I know, she whispered. No. You know that you loved me. You do not know what it was like to grow up inside a story someone else wrote. Every kindness has changed shape now. Every time you told me I was safe, I believed you, because you were my mother. And you were. But you were also the person who decided I did not need the truth. Miriam lowered her hand. Her cheeks were wet, but she did not wipe them. I know that now, she said. It was not enough. Clara did not want it to be enough, but it was the first sentence Miriam had spoken that did not try to protect either of them from what had happened. Thomas returned with a paper parcel under his arm. Mr. Carver says 15 minutes, he told them. Then he looked at the wallpaper. If there is anything you want that is not nailed to a beam, take it now. Clara stared at the swallows. I do not want to take the room, she said. You cannot, Thomas replied. No. She went to the wall beneath the remaining bluebird and carefully pulled away a loose strip of wallpaper. It came free with a dry, tearing sound. The piece was no bigger than her open hand. One swallow remained whole upon it, blue wings lifted against a sky that had faded nearly gray. Miriam watched her. I thought you might take the key, she said. Clara reached into her pocket. The brass key had been with her for 3 days. Its black velvet ribbon had grown soft from the warmth of her hand. It opens nothing, she said. No. You keep it. Miriam did not take it. No, Clara. That key belonged to the locked part of my life. I gave it to you because it should never have been only mine. Clara looked down at the small, worn teeth of it. Then I will keep it, she said, but not as permission, not as proof that you have forgiven yourself. I would not ask that. Good. For a moment, the old rhythm of their conversations returned, Miriam yielding an inch, Clara testing whether the inch was real. It was not peace, but it was recognizable ground. When they left room 7, Clara did not look back.
Outside the theater, Mr. Carver stood near the loading door with a handkerchief over his nose. He glanced at the scrap of wallpaper in Clara's hand. "That all?" he asked. "Yes," Clara said. He seemed almost disappointed. "It will be dust by Tuesday." Clara looked at the Marlowe's broken sign, at the brick walls holding years of rain and secrets. "Not all of it," she said. She did not return to Chicago on Monday. Instead, she stayed in St. Louis through the week while the workmen pulled down the roof of the theater. She did not stand in the alley each day. She had no wish to turn demolition into a vigil. But on Tuesday afternoon, when the proscenium came down with a crack that could be heard from the Venn House kitchen, she stopped at the window.
Miriam was at the sink, washing a cup. The sound made her freeze. Neither woman spoke. The next morning, Clara packed her suitcase. She placed the blue shawl inside first, then the tin box of paper birds, the photograph from Ada, and the small square of wallpaper. Last came the brass key. It was not an inheritance, she thought. It was evidence of a door that had been kept closed too long. Miriam stood in the bedroom doorway, holding Clara's gloves. "The carriage will be here in 20 minutes, she said. Clara took the gloves. "I know. Would you like me to come to the station?" The question was so tentative that Clara had to look away. "Yes," she said, "but do not come onto the platform." Miriam nodded. "All right." At the station, people hurried beneath the high iron roof with trunks and parcels, each one carrying a life that looked simple from a distance. A porter lifted Clara's suitcase into the baggage cart. Miriam stood beside her in the crowded waiting room, close enough for their sleeves to touch. "I do not know what happens now," Clara said. "Neither do I. I am going back to Chicago. I am going to work. I am not going to spend every day thinking about Helena." "Good." "That does not mean I do not think about her." "I know." "And it does not mean I have forgiven you." Miriam's face did not collapse. She only nodded, as if Clara had told her the train was late. "I know," she said. Clara studied her mother's hands. They were thin now, the knuckles raised, the fingers marked by years of needles, dishes, damp sheets, and the 1,000 small repairs that had held a boarding house together. Those hands had folded paper birds for 23 birthdays. Those hands had shut a gate. Both things were true. "Do not send me birds," Clara said. Miriam looked startled. Then she understood. "I will not. Not until I ask. Not until you ask." The call for Clara's train echoed under the roof. She kissed Miriam's cheek. It was not the fierce embrace of a daughter coming home. It was not a farewell to a stranger. It was simply a kiss, given carefully, with nothing promised beyond its own brief warmth. Then Clara turned and walked toward the platform. For the first month in Chicago, she threw herself into work. She accepted 2 new pupils and began giving lessons 3 evenings a week at a settlement house on the west side. The room held a battered upright piano and 12 children who fought over the one stool. Clara taught them scales, then folk songs, then the pleasure of making a sound together without waiting to be invited. She did not explain why she had come back from St. Louis with a blue shawl folded in the bottom drawer of her wardrobe. She did not explain why, some nights, she woke with the sentence, "A window is not a wall," moving through her mind like a tune she could not place. Miriam did not send birds. There were practical messages about the boarding house, about Mrs. Pietra's son, about the price of coal. Clara answered when she could. Some weeks they spoke only once, some weeks not at all. The silence between them no longer felt like peace, but it was, at least, a silence Clara had chosen. Winter passed. The lake froze at the edges. Spring came late, with dirty snow piled in the gutters, and a sudden week of rain that made the city smell of stone and horses. On the morning of Clara's 33rd birthday, there was no paper bird beneath her teacup. For a few minutes, she sat at her kitchen table with the empty saucer before her and felt something close to grief. Not for the paper itself, for the certainty of the ritual, for the childish belief that a mother could put one small object on a table and make the year feel held. Then she took out a sheet of pale blue paper from the music shop, the kind used to wrap new strings. She folded it slowly. The first attempt was poor. One wing was too wide, the beak blunt. Clara began again. By the third, she had made a bird that could stand upright on the table. At noon, someone knocked on her apartment door. Miriam stood in the hall with a small traveling bag and a damp collar from the spring rain. She looked uncertain, which Clara had once believed impossible. "I received your telegram," she said. Clara had sent it 2 days before. "Come for tea if you would like to. No bird required." "Come in," Clara said. Miriam entered and looked around the apartment. She had seen it once before, but only when Clara first moved in years ago, when the rooms had still smelled of fresh paint and determination. Now there were plants on the windowsill, stacks of music beside the piano, children's drawings pinned near the stove. "You have made it yours," Miriam said. "Yes." They sat at the kitchen table. Clara placed the blue paper bird between them. Miriam did not touch it. "Did you fold that?" she asked. "I did." "It is better than my first ones. I had a good teacher." The words could have been kind. They could have been cruel. Clara let them remain somewhere between. Miriam looked at the bird again. "What does it do?" Clara smiled, though her eyes stung. "It reminds me that a door can be opened from either side." Miriam drew in a breath. For a moment she seemed about to speak, then only nodded. Clara reached across the table and turned the bird so that one wing faced Miriam and the other faced herself. "My name is Clara March Venn," she said. "I am not giving either of them away." "You should not. I will keep the key, too." Miriam's hands rested quietly on the table. "Keep it. I may be angry again. You may. I may ask the same questions until you are tired of hearing them. Then I will answer them." Clara looked at her for a long time. She could not yet say, "Forgive me." She did not know whether she ever would. The past had not become smaller because it had been named. Helena March was still a woman who had left on a train. Miriam Venn was still a woman who had closed a gate. But Miriam had come when Clara invited her. She had come without a bird, without an explanation wrapped in kindness, without asking to be released from what she had done. Outside, a streetcar bell rang through the rain. Clara poured tea into 2 cups. The paper bird stood between them on the table, its blue wings open to the